Have you ever been in a room and suddenly, without warning, your attention shifts, not because someone said something, but because someone entered? They didn't speak, they didn't wave, they didn't need to, but somehow the energy changed. That's not coincidence. That's presence, and the most powerful kind is silent. We live in a world that rewards volume, loud voices, bold declarations, constant updates. We're taught that to be noticed, we have to say something. But what if the opposite were true? What if the most commanding presence didn't come from the person who speaks the loudest, but from the one who speaks the least? Niccolo Machiavelli, the famed political thinker, understood this centuries ago. He warned that every time you enter an argument, you're stepping onto a battlefield you didn't choose, one you're not in control of. And in doing so, you don't just risk losing the argument, you risk losing something far more valuable. Your calm, your frame, your invisible edge. Let that sink in. Because the moment you argue, you show your hand. You reveal what bothers you. You admit you can be provoked. And the more you try to prove yourself, the more power you give away. Real influence doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to explain. It moves in silence, pulling others in with quiet certainty while remaining untouched by their noise. Think of the leaders you respect most, the ones who walk into a room and command it, not because of their words, but because of their stillness, their restraint. You listen not because they demand your attention, but because they've already earned it without ever having to try. Now ask yourself, how often do you fall into arguments just to be heard? How often do you feel the urge to set the record straight? And when it's all over, did you really win anything? Or did you just lose a little more of your peace? Here's the truth Machiavelli knew and the Stoics practiced. Power isn't proven through debate. It's proven through control. Control of self, control of emotion, control of response. The more silent you become, the more people lean in. The less you react, the more unpredictable and powerful you appear. It's not about being passive. It's about being intentional. There's a quiet dominance that exists when someone chooses not to react. When someone stays composed in the middle of chaos, they project strength that no argument can match. In fact, silence often says what words never could. I don't need to prove anything to you. I already know who I am. And that unsettles people because most of the world is addicted to noise. They expect resistance. They want reaction. But when you give them silence instead, they're left to wrestle with their own ego. That's where the shift happens. You begin to rise, not because you fought harder, but because you refused to be dragged down in the first place. So the next time someone tries to pull you into an argument, pause, breathe. Remember this. Your power is not in how loudly you speak. It's in how deeply you don't need to. Stay silent. Stay grounded. Let your presence do the talking. And if this message resonates with you, make sure to subscribe, because we're only just beginning to explore the strength within you that no one else can take. Let's be honest. How many times have you walked away from an argument, even one you won, and still felt like you lost something? Maybe it was your energy, maybe your dignity, or maybe it was the silent confidence you carried before you opened your mouth. Here's a truth most people never realize. Arguing doesn't make you look strong, it makes you look reactive. We've been taught that arguing is a sign of intelligence, of logic, of standing your ground. But Niccolo Machiavelli, the master of strategic influence, saw things differently. He understood that when you argue, you're not displaying reason, you're displaying vulnerability. Because here's the reality. Arguments are rarely about facts. They're about ego. The very moment you feel the need to explain, to convince, to prove your point, you're admitting something quietly devastating, that someone else has enough power over you to make you feel uncertain, to make you need validation, to pull you out of your calm and into their frame. And when you step into their frame, you lose control of your own. Think of a debate not as a chess match, but as a street fight. You might land a good punch with your words, but in the process, you've exposed your stance, your limits, and your emotions. And emotions? That's what your opponent is really looking for. Because once they see what moves you, what angers you, what offends you, they've gained the advantage. You've handed them a map to your insecurities. Machiavelli understood this game well. So did the Stoics. So do the most effective leaders and strategists today. They all follow one timeless rule. Never argue when you can observe. It doesn't mean you roll over. It doesn't mean you avoid hard conversations. It means you don't take the bait. Because the person who argues reveals something deeper than their opinion. They reveal their emotional investment. And in the world of influence, that's weakness. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine a meeting at work. Two colleagues disagree. One immediately jumps in, defending their idea, raising their voice, trying to win the room. The other just listens, calm, collected. Maybe asks one or two clarifying questions. Doesn't rush to defend, just observes. Who do you think the rest of the room respects more? Exactly, because power isn't about dominating the conversation. It's about not needing to. People trust those who remain composed because composure is rare, especially in a world addicted to reaction. Now here's the twist. Even if your argument is right, the moment you argue, you lose your mystique. You trade clarity for chaos. You stop being an authority and become just another voice in the noise. And no one listens to noise. So the next time you feel the urge to argue, pause. Ask yourself, am I stepping into a battle that I didn't choose? Am I fighting not for truth, but for my ego? Because when you argue, you're not just explaining, you're exposing. You're telling the world, here's what gets to me. And trust me, someone is always listening. Someone who will remember. Someone who will use it later. So stay still, stay grounded. Let others reveal themselves through noise, while you build power through silence. And when you do speak, let it be purposeful. Let it land like a decision, not a defense. Because the man who doesn't argue, he doesn't look weak. He looks untouchable. Here's a question no one asks, but everyone should. What if the most powerful move is not moving at all? Not arguing, not reacting, not even explaining. What if power doesn't come from what you say, but from what you withhold? Niccolo Machiavelli, one of history's most strategic minds, understood something most people still miss. If you want to control the game, you don't argue. You observe. You influence. From a distance. Think about that. He wasn't saying you should avoid every confrontation. He was saying, don't get pulled into a fight you didn't choose, because every time you step into a debate, you step onto someone else's battlefield, under their terms, in their frame, to defend what? Your pride? Let's be clear, arguments don't change minds. They only trigger defenses. Because the moment someone feels their ego is under attack, they stop listening. You're not talking to their logic anymore. You're talking to their armor. And armored minds don't open. They dig in. You could bring the most rational, well-reasoned case in the world and still lose. Not because you were wrong, but because you challenged something deeper than facts, their identity. Now here's where silence becomes your greatest asset. When you say nothing, when you don't take the bait, you stay in control. You don't lose presence. You build it. Because mystery is power. The less people know what you're thinking, the more they wonder. The more they wonder, the more energy they spend trying to read you. And the more energy they spend, the more control you hold. Let me ask you this. Who commands more attention? The person frantically trying to explain their side? Or the one who stands still, calm, unshaken, and says nothing? That stillness isn't weakness, it's strategy. Because when you don't react, you show that you're not emotionally bound to the chaos around you. You demonstrate that your identity, your worth, your sense of self isn't up for negotiation. And that, my friend, is rare. We live in a world that feeds on reaction. Social media thrives on it. Public discourse is built on it. Everyone wants to drag you into the noise, to get a response, to feel seen, to validate themselves by shaking your calm. But when you don't respond, you send a different message, not just to them, but to everyone watching. I am not here to be understood. I am here to stand. And that unsettles people because most can't handle not being in control of the narrative. You become unpredictable. And in power dynamics, unpredictability is leverage. Remember, the loudest person in the room isn't the most powerful. It's the one everyone's watching, but no one can read. Machiavelli knew this. So did the Stoics. So do the most effective people in the world today. They don't shout, they signal. They don't argue. They influence. They don't explain. They embody. You don't need to speak to hold power. You need to hold yourself. So next time someone comes at you, whether in a meeting, an argument, a relationship, or a post online, pause. Let them say what they need to say. Let them burn themselves out on their own emotional fire. And you stay grounded, you stay clear, you stay still. Because silence doesn't mean absence. It means restraint. It means watching from the higher ground while others lose themselves in noise. That's real power. That's real leadership. And that's how you control the game without ever needing to play it. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone changed your mind because they argued with you? Really think about that. Chances are the more they pushed, the more you resisted. Not because they were wrong, but because something inside you, your ego, your identity, didn't want to be proven wrong. You didn't want to lose. That's the trap of argument. And it's why truly powerful people almost never step into it. They don't yell. They don't beg to be understood. They don't try to force a shift. Instead, they plant. Like seeds, they drop ideas subtly, quietly, and then they let time do the talking. That's the difference between someone trying to prove power and someone who owns it. Because here's the truth. Power doesn't chase. It doesn't perform. It holds. It waits. It watches. The moment you argue, you reveal more than your opinion. You reveal your triggers. You show where your ego flares. You give away your emotional map and someone else can start driving. But silence? Silence is armor. It shields your thoughts. It protects your position. It creates space that makes others curious, maybe even uncomfortable, because they don't know where you stand. And that mystery, that unreadable calm, that's where your real leverage lives. Think about some of the most commanding people you've ever met. They're not the ones trying to dominate the conversation. They're the ones who don't need to. They listen more than they speak. And when they finally do speak, everyone leans in because it means something. They've built weight behind their words by not wasting them. You see, when you're calm, when you're in control, you gain something rare. You shape outcomes without forcing them. You don't persuade with pressure. You influence with presence. Because people don't remember arguments. They remember energy. They remember how you made them feel. And someone who remains still while the world gets loud, who stays grounded while others spin out, that person earns a kind of respect you can't fake. This is why composure is the cornerstone of true leadership. In a crisis, the person who stays calm becomes the anchor. In a debate, the one who doesn't flinch becomes the standard. In relationships, the one who doesn't rush to defend, but instead listens with clarity and responds with intent, becomes the rock others trust. Now let's be clear. This doesn't mean staying silent forever. It doesn't mean avoiding your voice. It means mastering the timing of your voice. And that's what most people never learn. They speak when they're triggered. They argue to be seen. They explain because they're afraid of being misunderstood. But the powerful understand this. You don't need to explain when you embody your truth. You don't need to be loud when your life speaks for itself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one button." And that's the entire point. Don't declare your worth, demonstrate it. Don't rush to defend your position. Let your composure be your position. Because every time you stay calm under pressure, you're showing the world something they can't ignore. That you are not reactive. You are intentional. You are grounded. And in a world obsessed with getting a reaction, being the one who doesn't flinch is the most powerful move you can make. So the next time someone comes at you with judgment, criticism, or provocation, remember this. You don't need to match their energy. You don't need to prove your worth. Just breathe, pause, and let your silence say what words never could. Because in the end, it's not the hammer that reshapes the world. It's the seed. And the person who plants that seed patiently, quietly, intentionally, will always outlast the one who tries to shout it into bloom. Let's talk about something most people completely overlook. Arguing isn't just a waste of energy. It's a dangerous leak of information. You might think you're defending yourself, standing up for your values, proving your point. But in reality, every time you step into an argument, you're handing your opponent a map of your emotions. And believe me, someone's always watching, always listening. Because while you're busy defending, they're learning, they're measuring, they're calculating how to manipulate you next time. This is the real cost of arguing. It's not just about the outcome. It's about what you expose in the process. Think about it like this. Every emotional reaction is a data point. When you raise your voice, they learn what makes you angry. When you rush to explain, they learn what you fear being misunderstood about. When you get defensive, they discover your insecurities. And once they know those things, you become predictable. And predictability kills power. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this better than most. He believed that the one who reveals less controls more. Because power doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from being unreadable. It comes from having the ability to observe others while giving them nothing in return. Here's a simple truth. People don't fear the loud one in the room. They fear the silent one, the one who doesn't flinch, the one who listens more than they speak, the one who reveals nothing but sees everything. That's the person no one can figure out. And in any power dynamic, the one you can't figure out is the one you fear the most. Now ask yourself, how often have you let someone see too much? In a heated conversation, have you ever felt that sinking feeling afterward? That you gave them more than just your argument? You gave them insight into you. That's not strength. That's exposure. And in the wrong hands, exposure becomes leverage. This is why restraint isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Silence is not retreat. It's strategy. It's choosing not to give your opponent the blueprint to your behavior. Let me give you a real-world example. Imagine a high-stakes negotiation. One side is calm, quiet, asking questions. The other is visibly irritated, over-explaining, trying to control the room. Who has the upper hand? Every emotional twitch, every defensive word, every unnecessary explanation becomes intel. And in that silence, the calm negotiator is collecting everything while giving away nothing. This same principle applies in everyday life, in arguments with your partner, in comments on social media, in tense meetings at work. The moment you take the bait, you're no longer in control because now the other person isn't reacting to you, they're guiding you. And that's how most people lose, not in logic, but in leverage. The person who can't control their reactions becomes easy to steer. But the one who watches quietly, waits patiently, and speaks only with purpose, that person becomes a fortress. Strong, still, untouchable. So how do you become that person? Start by noticing when your ego wants to jump in. When you feel the urge to set the record straight, pause. When someone tries to provoke you, pause again. Don't respond on their terms. Don't play the game they've laid out for you. Because here's the truth. Most people don't argue to discover truth. They argue to gain control. And when you stay silent, when you stay composed, you deny them that control. You send a quiet, powerful message. I don't owe you my energy. I don't need to be understood to know who I am. That's what makes you powerful, not your words, but your ability to withhold them. So the next time someone tries to pull you into a battle, remember this. You don't win by proving yourself. You win by staying unreadable. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let them exhaust themselves chasing a reaction that will never come. Because the quietest person in the room isn't weak. They're just the only one who's truly in control. Let's bring this down to earth for a moment. Everything we've talked about so far, silence, restraint, emotional control, sounds powerful in theory, but how does it actually play out in the real world? Because if a philosophy doesn't work on the ground, in your relationships, in your career, in daily challenges, it's just an idea. But silence, used strategically, it's one of the most practical tools you'll ever carry. Let's start with the workplace. Have you ever noticed how the person who argues in every meeting, who constantly defends every detail, who talks just to sound smart, eventually loses credibility? Why? Because noise erodes trust. It makes people wonder if you're trying to cover something up. It shows emotional investment in every little thing, and that's not leadership. Now contrast that with someone who barely speaks, but when they do, the whole room listens. That person, that's the strategist. That's the one who's observed, thought deeply, waited, and then delivered a sentence that shifts the conversation. They don't argue, they anchor. Because in professional settings, silence isn't passivity, it's composure. And composure earns more respect than volume ever will. Now let's talk about something more personal. Your relationships, romantic, familial, close friendships. These are emotional spaces, and emotional spaces are where silence becomes a form of strength, not to hurt, but to preserve. When someone lashes out, whether it's anger, insecurity, or frustration, our instinct is to fire back, to defend, explain, prove we're right. But here's a shift in perspective. Not every emotional outburst deserves your response. Not every storm needs your sail. Sometimes the strongest move is to stay quiet, not to dismiss, but to hold space, to let the emotion pass like a wave without being pulled under. Because when you stay calm, you protect the relationship's deeper foundation. You maintain your frame. You don't let the chaos dictate your center. Now think about how this applies to the digital world, especially social media. Today, everyone's waiting to be triggered. One comment, one post, one misunderstood sentence, and the debate begins. The insults fly. The reputations crumble. But here's the truth no one tells you. The moment you argue with nonsense, you elevate it. The moment you respond to baseless criticism, you legitimize it. That's how people lose their presence online. Not because they were wrong, but because they gave their energy to things beneath them. You don't need to win every comment thread. You don't need to fight every troll. Sometimes silence is the sharpest reply. It tells the world, I'm here for something higher. Because remember, the internet never forgets, but it also moves fast. And if you don't feed the fire, it burns out. Lastly, let's talk about business, entrepreneurship, leadership, negotiation, strategy. In these fields, people think results come from charisma, persuasion, endless talking. But in truth, the most powerful business moves are often made without words. Think about it. When a client doubts you, do you explain yourself for 20 minutes, or do you let your past results speak? When a competitor attacks you publicly, do you clap back, or do you quietly outperform them and let the numbers talk? Silence in business is not surrender, it's positioning. Because here's the bottom line, defensiveness looks weak, clarity looks strong, and nothing is clearer than a result that speaks for itself. In all these areas, work, relationships, social media, business, silence becomes your invisible armor. It guards your energy, it protects your image, and most importantly, it gives you control over the battlefield. It reminds people that your power doesn't come from performance. It comes from presence. So start applying it, not once, not when it's easy, but consistently. Pause before you speak. Wait before you react. Let your stillness sharpen your message. Because in a world that's always shouting, the one who chooses silence speaks the loudest. Let's take a moment to bring everything we've explored together. Because at the core of it all, there's one powerful truth. Silence is not weakness. Silence is mastery. In a world addicted to noise, constant notifications, instant opinions, endless debates, silence isn't just rare. It's revolutionary. It's not avoidance. It's not passivity. It's not fear. It's a choice. A disciplined, deliberate decision to protect your energy, preserve your dignity, and hold your ground without ever needing to raise your voice. When someone chooses silence in the face of provocation, it tells you something. It tells you they are no longer driven by impulse. They are led by intention. And that level of control, that level of inner stillness, that's the highest form of strength. Because here's what most people never realize. You don't need to win the argument when you've already won yourself. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard when your very presence speaks volumes. You don't need to demand respect when you embody it naturally. People who have mastered silence are not disengaged. They're deeply attuned. They observe more. They process more. And when they speak, they don't fill space. They shift it. Let me ask you, when was the last time someone said very little but made everyone pause? That's power. That's the kind of presence that doesn't just influence the room, it anchors it. Because real power doesn't need to chase, it doesn't need to justify, it doesn't need to perform, it simply is. And when you carry that kind of stillness within you, people notice, even if they don't fully understand it. They feel it. They feel your boundaries, they feel your confidence. They feel your peace, and deep down they respect it. Because most people can't access it themselves. Think about how rare that is. Someone who doesn't flinch, who doesn't beg to be understood, who doesn't feel the need to constantly prove their worth. That person becomes unshakable, not because they fight every battle, but because they choose not to. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not react at all. Silence becomes your shield. Composure becomes your weapon. And the calm you carry within, that becomes your power. Now, some may say, but isn't staying silent letting people walk over you? No, staying silent doesn't mean being a doormat. It means being a fortress. It means you know which battles are worth fighting and which ones aren't worth your time, your peace, or your energy. It means you've stepped into a new kind of leadership, not the loud kind, not the flashy kind, but the kind rooted in internal clarity. You don't need to react to every opinion. You don't need to respond to every jab. You don't need to explain yourself to people who have already made up their minds. That's not arrogance. That's awareness. Because when you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you finally make room to understand yourself. And that's where transformation begins. You start listening more to your own thoughts, your own values, your own instincts. You stop wasting energy on what you can't control and start building influence from the inside out. And the best part? The world adjusts. People begin to treat you differently. They pause before they speak. They notice your stillness. And they begin to respect what they can't shake. Because the most powerful people in the world are not loud. They are centered. And that centeredness radiates in ways words never can. So if you've made it this far, let this be your final takeaway. Silence is not the absence of something. It's the presence of everything that matters. It is clarity. It is confidence. It is command. And when you master the art of silence, you no longer need to win arguments. You start winning something far greater. Self-respect, strategic advantage, inner freedom. So the next time life tests your patience, your pride, your peace, don't rush to respond. Don't try to be the loudest in the room. Instead, pause, breathe, stand tall in your stillness, and let the world feel your silence. Because as we've seen time and time again, the person who refuses to argue often wins battles most people never even see. If this message spoke to something inside you, hit subscribe, because we're only getting started on the journey of mastering inner power. And in the comments, write, "Stay silent." A quiet reminder of the strength you already carry. Everywhere you go, stay calm, stay intentional, stay untouchable. This is your time.